Failed selection twice, nearly quit the academy once, missed a promotion by a single point on a written exam. None of that is in your personnel file summary page, only the outcomes. Everyone on this team has a version of that same buried page. Nobody talks about it. This is what happened underneath the version of the story where everything simply worked. It starts on a fitness test you fail, not a metaphor. An actual failure on an actual clipboard with your actual name written beside it. Nobody in this building would guess any of that from the insignia on your collar. That is exactly why it is worth telling properly, from the first morning to the last. Level 1. The recruit. You're 22, and your first attempt at the entry fitness test ends 11 seconds over the limit, which the sheet in front of you records without any comment at all. The instructor overseeing intake is a gray-haired man named Renner, pale, watchful eyes, who tells failed applicants only the date of the next available retest, and nothing else. You trained for 4 months on your own time before the second attempt, running before work and after it. And you fail again, this time by 4 seconds instead of 11. The third attempt you pass by less than 2 seconds, and you do not celebrate it, because you have learned by then that passing barely and passing well feel identical from the inside. 42 recruits start the academy together. The washout rate is brutal and mostly invisible, a name simply absent from the roster call the next morning with no explanation offered. The days run from before first light until well after dark, and the exhaustion becomes a constant background condition rather than something you notice arriving. Renner runs the academy the way he ran intake, flat and unembellished, and you learn within a week that the recruits he stops correcting are the ones already being quietly written off. You are corrected constantly for the first month on your stance, your pacing, your report writing, and you privately take the correction as proof you have not yet been written off. You spend evenings rewriting reports that came back marked in red, learning that half this job is language precise enough to survive a courtroom 2 years later. A defensive tactics exam in week 9 goes badly. You freeze mid-technique in front of the whole class, and the retest is scheduled for the following morning without any softness attached to it. You do not sleep properly that night. You run the technique in your head so many times, it stops making sense as movement at all, only as a sequence of words you are reciting. The retest goes cleanly. Renner does not comment on it, which, by now you understand, is the single closest thing to praise the man is structurally capable of offering anyone. You start to notice which recruits are quietly helping the others and which are only competing, and you file that away as something that will matter later far more than any test score. 26 of the original 42 graduate. You are 26th by class ranking, and you keep that number to yourself for years before ever telling anyone at all. You understand, standing there, that surviving the academy and being good at the job are two entirely different claims, and only one of them has actually been proven yet. Nobody tells you on that first morning what the actual ratio is going to be, that the failures will outnumber the clean successes by a considerable margin for the entire career. Level 2. The patrol officer. You are 24, and the first real mistake of your career happens in your 3rd month. Misreading a domestic call is lower risk than it actually was. Your partner, a stocky officer named Ibarra, corrects the approach before it costs anyone anything, stepping in without raising his voice, and says nothing about it again for the rest of the shift. You write the incident report yourself that night, listing your own misjudgment in plain terms, because you have already decided that bearing it would cost you more than admitting it. Ibarra reads it before it is filed and adds nothing, changes nothing, simply initials it, and tells you that the report being honest is the only part of tonight that actually matters now. You spend the following month slower and more deliberate on every call, and you notice, uncomfortably, that some officers read your caution as weakness rather than correction. A supervisor questions your response time on a burglary call, and you have no good answer beyond the truth that you have become genuinely afraid of moving too fast again. Ibarra tells you plainly off the record that fear after a mistake is useful for exactly 1 year, and after that, it stops being caution and starts being a different kind of failure. You force yourself back to full pace on the next domestic call, stomach tight the entire drive, and it resolves cleanly, which does very little to actually settle the feeling in your chest. Your beat runs mostly through the same 8 streets, and within a year, you know which houses call every month, which never call at all, and which of those 2 facts worries you more. You attend a road accident on a wet night and spend 11 minutes keeping a stranger conscious and talking until an ambulance arrives, and nobody ever tells you whether he made it. You look for his name in the local paper for 3 weeks afterward and never find it, and you learn to close the file in your own head without the ending being provided to you. 2 years on patrol pass this way, competence arriving in uneven pieces rather than all at once, each mistake teaching you something the previous one somehow had not. You submit your tactical selection application in your final eligible month, uncertain whether the mistake in month 3 will show up somewhere in a file you cannot see. Ibarra signs the supervisor recommendation without hesitation, telling you that the mistake you made and owned is worth more on that form than a clean record that was simply never tested. You post it on a Tuesday and spend the following 6 weeks pretending you are not waiting for a letter, which everyone on your shift sees straight through immediately. Level 3, the tactical candidate. You are 26 and your first attempt at selection ends on day 4. Cut on a stress shoot, you rush and fail under a sleep-deprived clock. The instructor who cuts you is a lean, flat-eyed woman named Solheim, who tells failed candidates once, without cruelty and without softness, that the door stays open for exactly 1 more attempt. You spend the following year on patrol training specifically for the stress shoot, running it in your head on every quiet call, rebuilding the exact sequence that broke down under pressure. You rebuild your whole approach to pressure that year, learning to slow your breathing deliberately before a decision rather than simply hoping the panic does not arrive. Your second attempt at selection is harder than the first because you now know precisely what failing feels like and precisely how little warning arrives before it happens. The physical testing runs across 4 days with broken sleep between each one, because a tired decision under load is exactly what this job will actually ask of you later. Solheim runs the same stress shoot on day 4, the exact station that failed you the first time, and you understand she has arranged this deliberately rather than by any coincidence. You pass it clean, and you feel almost nothing in the moment, the relief arriving nearly a full day later while you are doing something completely unrelated. The written exam, the panel interview, the psychological evaluation, and the background check all follow, and none of them frighten you nearly as much as the memory of day 4 did. Close quarters drills run for days in a shoot house, room after room, and you notice your hands no longer shake between them the way they did on your first attempt. You learn to move as one part of a 4-man stack rather than as an individual, which turns out to be a completely different skill from anything the academy ever taught you. Solheim pulls you aside once across the entire second selection and tells you only that failing once and returning tells her more about you than passing cleanly the first time ever could. Medical training under simulated fire follows, tourniquets applied at speed, and you find the physical stress easier now than the memory of being cut still is. You are tested on decision-making under load, given scenarios with no clean answer, and marked less on what you choose than on whether you can explain why you chose it afterward. On the final day, Solheim reads a short list aloud. Your name is on it this time. She says only report Monday and does not mention day 4 again, then or ever. You sit alone in your car afterward for a long while, thinking less about the past and more about the version of you that failed here exactly 1 year earlier. Level 4, the operator. You are 28, and 8 months in, a warrant service goes wrong because of a call you make, a door you clear a half-second too fast. Nobody is badly hurt. The mistake is real regardless, and the after-action review names it plainly. Your name attached to a specific decision at a specific second on the timeline. You expect to be pulled from the roster. Instead, you are scheduled for extra reps on room clearing, which feels worse, because it means they still trust you enough to bother fixing it. You run that same room clearing drill more times over the following month than you can accurately count. And the half-second you lost returns slowly, without any moment you can point to. Your next live entry is a warrant service on a similar layout, and you clear the same type of doorway correctly this time, though the memory of the first one does not leave you at all. A vehicle pursuit ends with the driver abandoning the car on a rail overpass. And refusing to climb down, traffic backed up for miles in both directions while you talk your way across the girders toward him. He climbs down on his own once you are close enough to simply talk rather than shout, and the relief afterward has nothing to do with heroics, only with a plan that finally accounted for how frightened rather than dangerous most people on a ledge actually are. You are trusted with point position on entries a year later, the position given to the operator with the fewest hesitations, and you understand exactly how much of that trust was rebuilt rather than simply earned once. A senior operator tells you plainly that the team trusts people who have already failed and corrected far more than people who have simply never yet been tested at all. You respond to warrant services and barricades through the rest of the year, most resolving in minutes, a handful stretching into hours that feel considerably longer than they are. You learn that the job is almost entirely waiting, occasionally broken by 90 seconds that decide whether you sleep properly for the rest of that particular week. You attend a call-out at a school after hours that turns out to be a caretaker who set off an alarm, and the anticlimax of it leaves the whole team quiet on the drive back. 2 years pass this way. Competence built visibly on top of one specific, named mistake rather than in spite of it, which is not the story you expected going in. The team leader position opens the same month your file is finally fully clear of the incident that once nearly ended your career on this unit entirely. You almost do not apply, which surprises you, until you work out that you are not afraid of the responsibility so much as of being trusted with it and then getting it wrong publicly. Level 5, the sniper observer. You are 31, and your first attempt at the position fails on a 6-hour stillness exercise you cannot physically complete without shifting. The candidate who passes it beside you, a wiry man named Fam, tells you afterward, without any unkindness at all, that stillness is a trained skill and not a natural gift he happened to have. You spend 3 months training stillness specifically, hours at a time in your own backyard, learning to separate discomfort from actual danger the way Fam apparently already had. You learn to slow your own heart rate deliberately, to breathe through discomfort rather than around it, and to stop treating every muscle complaint as information worth acting on. Your second attempt at the stillness test passes, though it costs you more visible effort than it seems to cost anyone else on the range that same morning. Fam becomes your spotter afterward, regardless of the slower path you took to get there, and tells you flatly that the operators who had to train it properly tend to hold it longer under real pressure. You hold Overwatch together during a warehouse standoff that runs 9 hours, and the stillness that once nearly failed you becomes the single, steadiest part of the entire day. You spend more of that day watching a single loading door than you have spent watching anything in your life. And the discipline of it is entirely different from the discipline of moving. Fam keeps no notes and explains nothing, but tells you once, unprompted, that watching you train the hard way taught him something about patience he had never needed to learn himself. 5 years pass on Overwatch, Hours behind glass for every minute spent moving, the discomfort of stillness never fully disappearing, only becoming something you have learned to carry properly. A prison disturbance runs 11 hours, and you hold the same rooftop position the entire time without once needing to shift. And you think briefly of the 6-hour test you once failed. You are called to a hostage situation at a freight yard that stretches into a second day, and the cold becomes simply another variable to manage rather than a reason to move. It resolves without incident on the second morning, and FAM cases the rifle in complete silence, which you have learned by now is itself the entire debrief. When the team leader position opens, FAM tells you plainly you should take it, because the discipline that took you 3 attempts to build is exactly the discipline a team actually needs at the top. Level 6, Team Leader. You are 36, and your first operational plan as leader is rejected outright by the captain reviewing it, sent back with 3 pages of corrections attached. The captain, a broad-bearded man named Grieve, tells you the plan failed because you wrote it the way an operator thinks, rather than the way a commander has to, and that the difference matters enormously. You rewrite the plan twice more before it is approved, each version stripping out the instinct to simply do everything yourself and replacing it with a structure other people can actually execute. Your first approved plan runs cleanly, though you spend the entire operation certain something is about to go wrong, a certainty that does not fully leave you for years afterward. Grieve tells you afterward that the tension never fully leaves any competent team leader, and that the ones who claim otherwise are usually the ones you should trust the least. A warrant service under your command goes wrong in its first few seconds, regardless of the planning, and the outcome depends entirely on decisions made faster than you can properly think them through. Everyone comes out. You spend the following week rewriting the standard entry procedure for that specific property type, because you have learned that a mistake left uncorrected simply waits to repeat itself. You start running your own briefings differently, walking the team through the 2 or 3 ways the plan could fail before you walk them through how it is supposed to work. You train newer operators the way Solheim once trained you, mentioning your own early failures plainly rather than hiding them, because the hiding never actually helped anyone. A young operator asks you directly whether you ever failed selection. You tell her the truth in detail and watch something in her posture visibly settle afterward. You lead a multi-team response to a threat at a large public event, coordinating an evacuation that runs cleanly enough that it barely makes the local news the following day. Clean and unremarkable is, you understand by now, the actual goal. And it is a strange kind of pride to be quietly proud of a story nobody outside the unit will ever hear about. You hold the position for 4 years, and somewhere in there, the job stops feeling like a performance you might be caught out in and starts simply feeling like work you know how to do. Grieve recommends you for negotiation training not long after, telling the panel that a team leader who can admit fault out loud is exactly the kind of person this department needs more of. Level 7, Negotiator. You are 41, and your first live call ends badly, the man on the line hanging up twice before the situation resolves through tactical entry instead of your voice. Your training coach, a composed, silver-locked woman named Adeyemi, reviews the recording afterward and tells you plainly that you tried to solve the situation instead of simply staying in it. You listen to that recording of your own voice more times than is entirely comfortable, hearing exactly where you rushed a silence that should have been allowed to sit there longer. Adeyemi runs you through a dozen simulated calls over the following weeks, deliberately hostile ones, deliberately silent ones, until staying inside, a silence stops feeling like failure. You learn that almost nobody in crisis wants to be argued with, and that the useful move is nearly always to prove you have actually heard the last thing they said. Your second live call is a locked pharmacy where an employee has barricaded himself in the stockroom after a robbery attempt he believes is still ongoing outside, and he will not respond to anything shouted through the door. You switch to writing short notes and sliding them under the door instead of shouting, and somewhere in the 40 minutes that follow his replies, slide back steadier and more willing to actually read what you send him. Adeyemi listens on the other channel the entire time and tells you afterward, without any drama, that the difference between this call and the first one is the only lesson that actually mattered. He unlocks the door himself once the notes confirm the robbery is over, and you understand, watching him step out, that the failed first call taught you more about waiting than any clean one ever could. You handle a barricade in a flat where the man inside is frightened rather than dangerous, and the tactical team waits outside for 2 hours doing nothing at all while you work the door alone. You keep a private mental account of every silence you nearly filled too early and managed at the last second not to. And it is a considerably longer list than you would like. You handle roughly 25 calls over the following years, and you remember every single one with a clarity the operator years somehow never quite managed to produce. Adeyemi tells you before she retires that the negotiators worth training are always the ones who remember exactly how their first call went wrong, because the ones who forget stop actually listening. You take her advice and keep the recording of your worst call in a drawer for the rest of your career, not as punishment, but as the most useful thing anyone ever gave you. Level 8 Commander. You are 47, and you take the post carrying every one of the failures the earlier ranks put on record, because none of them, in the end, disqualified you from anything. You approve operational plans now the way Grieve once corrected yours, sending them back with honest notes rather than simply signing whatever is placed in fro. And of you. You discover that command is mostly deciding which risks are acceptable on behalf of people who will bear them personally while you sit 3 blocks away and wait for radio traffic. Grieve, retired 2 years by then, calls occasionally just to ask how the job is sitting with you, and tells you once that the calls stop mattering the day you stop needing to make them. A wildfire forces an evacuation of 6 blocks, with an armed man refusing to leave his property in the middle of it, and you run the whole response from the passenger seat of a moving command vehicle for 19 hours straight. It ends with the man walked out by his own adult son, a detail nobody's plan accounted for, and nobody could have. And you spend the drive home turning over how much of command is simply arriving prepared to be wrong. You train the young operator who once asked whether you had failed selection, watching her take over her own team, and you tell her plainly that you still remember day 4 of yours. You start writing the unit's failure reviews differently, making sure every one of them names what was learned as prominently as it names what went wrong. 25 years accumulate this way, each rank standing visibly on a specific mistake rather than hiding one. And the day finally arrives when the department tells you it is time to consider handing the post to somebody else. You spend your final month writing recommendation letters that mention deliberately the exact moment each candidate failed and what they visibly did about it afterward. On your last day, you skip the formal send-off entirely, slipping out through the side entrance instead, because a career built on visible correction never needed a ceremony to prove it happened. Nobody stops you on the way out, which is exactly what you arranged, and the car park is empty enough that the whole thing takes less than 90 seconds from desk to driver's seat. You drive home that final night thinking less about any single success and more about the 4 seconds you failed the fitness test by, 25 years and 1 whole career earlier. You think about Renner, who never once told you when you were doing well, and whose silence you eventually understood was the most precise feedback anyone ever gave you. You think about Ibarra, who corrected your first real mistake without raising his voice, and who still, as far as you know, tells young officers that an honest report matters more than a clean one. You think about Solheim, who cut you once and let you back in once, and who you understand still runs selection exactly the same unsentimental way, door open for precisely 1 more attempt. You think about Pham, who trained you through the stillness you once failed, and who taught you, without ever quite meaning to, that patience is built and not simply given to certain people. You think about Adeyemi, who made you listen to your own worst call until it stopped being shameful and started being useful, which you have come to understand was the entire point of it. You think about Grieve, who rejected your first plan outright and then spent 4 years making sure you never needed him to reject another one. You spent 25 years learning exactly when to move and when to wait. And the strange thing, looking back, is that almost every one of those lessons arrived attached to something you got wrong first. Nobody warned you at 22, failing that first fitness test by 11 seconds, that the failing was going to end up mattering more than almost anything you eventually got right.